Hello, how are you today?
Pretty well, I'm up in the dark.
In the dark?
But yeah, I'm sitting in the dark if you can see my camera. But
Yeah,
yeah, other than that, it's all good. Your like anime, VTube thing is so cute.
thank you. I've made it on the Viroid studio. I'm gonna
Hmm.
try to.
It moves and everything, you know.
Yeah, it's the like the. I've made a whole thing that if I get ever 50 viewers live, then I'll do a reveal of how I look like in reality.
Mm,
But
cool.
that might be
Yeah.
some way away, you know?
Yep. Whatever. This is cute as well.
Thank you.
Do whatever feels good.
True.
Ah. Yeah,
So,
well, I appreciate you, inviting me to talk. I have been chatting a bit with you on Twitter, but
yeah,
yeah, it's about it. Yeah, the
so
ducks. Invitation with ducks.
it's true. The Ducky invitation. So, where would we want to sort of start this talk? Maybe from,
Pretty much
yeah,
whatever you want, I'm down. We talked a bit in like messages. We can talk about things we talked there or whatever you want, pretty much.
yeah. Like we can talk about a brief history of the whole thing, like from like what I've said about the whole Putin speech,
Mm-hmm.
about the
Sure.
Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth thing, etc. Like, because I think you've sent me a map, right?
Yeah, the bunch of maps basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's honestly like this whole thing about you talked about it like Russians generally have like those arguments that if you can even call them arguments obviously, but that apparently like Ukraine didn't exist before Lenin generously
Yeah,
gifted us with us being Ukrainians, or they will say like something like Khrushchev gave us like Crimea, whatever the heck, right?
yeah,
So this is something that apparently Ukraine like kind of didn't exist, which is kind of ironic considering that on the maps of like 17th century, for example, of old Europe maps, you can see Ukraine being called either
Ukraine.
Ukraine or Ukraine or something like that, right?
Yeah, and
Or you
there's
would see like the land of Cossacks or something like that. Oh, what
yeah,
is going on? You're
yeah.
like moving.
Oh,
Your like avatar is like boom, boom, boom,
it's
like that.
because I have like a very great quote. I'm gonna translate it from Polish from actually 17 on or basically 18th century from a traveler. It is
Mhm.
from the book Kozacy Zaporoscy, the Zaporozhian
Yeah,
Cossacks.
yeah. Uh-huh.
The quote goes as follows: Ukraine is the promised land that God had promised to the Jewish nation. It flows with honey and milk.
Hmm.
Those who once went to Ukraine cannot be, cannot be divided from it. It sort of attracts all people like magnet attracts steel. Ukrainian sky laughs with you as it, tries to attract people to itself. There are fruit trees growing everywhere. And it basically describes how beautiful the nature is. That is basically heaven on earth. That it's, plentiful. That there is a lot of
Yeah,
bounty, you know?
truly is. Yeah. Otherwise, when others don't try to annihilate us, life is pretty okay. Yeah, but this is just what I was talking about the maps wise, basically, is that you can actually see like land of the Cossacks or
Yeah,
Terra Cossacks, whatever. Oh, it's called Ukraine, just straight up Ukraine on those
it is
maps.
called, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas a lovely fact that Russia simply doesn't exist on those maps. It's either called Moscovia or Moscovitica, or it's called
The Duchy of,
Tatari.
yeah,
On
Duchy
the
of,
maps, it's not did not exist pretty much at all. Only after rebranding, which is Russian Empire that was created, if I'm not mistaken, in 1721. So yeah, so
Yes.
also this like argument about borderlands you can hear quite a lot,
Hmm.
some stupid shit that, which is basically even people like Hassan and people like that repeat it, I believe. So yeah, it's very kind of like prominent Russian propaganda talking point, which they pretty much just use this misunderstanding in language, which in Ukrainian language, the word country, like is kraina.
Yeah.
So Ukraine is something like your country, right? So like
Hmm.
England, Deutschland, whatever the heck, right? Most
Kraina,
people name their
the
yeah, yeah.
land.
But in Russia, the word country is strana, so
Hmm.
completely different word. And they have the word Ukraina, which means like outskirts, so borderlands. So they pretend that this is what this word means, but the difference is that in Ukrainian, kraina means country, not borderlands. It's in
And
different languages, as you know.
yeah.
So yeah.
And of course, you have
Uh,
Polish, in which country is kraj.
yeah. And also, it's kind of funny how the heck can you be uh, borderlands of an empire that didn't exist before, this name was
Yeah,
created. So,
exactly.
so you have Ukraine on the maps and mentioned in text by travelers, by like a bunch of people, cartographers of the time. Like
Yeah.
they mentioned it basically as Ukraine back in the day. And this map I showed you is I believe like 7016,
Yeah. And the
and
book is
even prior.
about, for like the quote that I gave you is also about from that
Yeah.
time period.
So so Russian Empire did not even exist at the time. So I'm kind of confused by how can you be borderlands of something that
Yeah.
didn't exist. But
Of course, I have an answer to that because it goes back to that whole complex thing that I told you about on Twitter. Because before everything, there was the Kiev Rush that existed as a big,
Mhm.
you know, big country, and it encompassed what was later Duchy of Moscow.
Kievan Russia.
Yeah, and basically the creation of the whole Russian Empire was an attempt for the Duchy of Moscow to claim itself to be the main
Yeah, yeah.
inheritor of the Kiev Rush, and that all the other places are basically just parts of the real inheritor, when that is sort of, well, blatantly untrue, because the if you want to look for an inheritor of the Kiev Rush, it would be Kiev, right? Not
Yeah.
Moscow.
Has a word Kiev in it for a reason.
Yeah,
Also had the same money currency hryvnias basically. We also have the exact same like this like trident trezub, like a trident symbol of Ukraine.
mm,
This symbol is you can find on ancient Kievan Rus coins.
yeah,
So that's yeah, so it's just this is just directly us obviously, but other people as well, of course, like spread after the Kievan Rus was dissolved, obviously, right? But
yeah,
yeah, but then pretty much what we call it is like kind of like cultural appropriation in a way, because it's just Piotr Pershi, which is like Peter the First, like emperor, right? Russian emperor. He basically did sort of like a rebranding.
yes,
So he took like this kind of like name because it allowed him the opportunity to ally with the like Western European type of sphere, not like Tataria, Mongolia, like
yeah,
Asian basically heritage. And other than that, he really like wanted to ally with the big guys of the time, which were like French and like
yeah,
Austro-Hungary and people like that, with which all of them obviously in the European sphere. So for him to basically connect Russian Empire in this sphere, he had to find some kind of like ancient history that connected them to Europe, which was Kievan Rus for him, and this is
yeah.
why basically it was done. So yeah.
And of course, this brings me back to my main topic of study, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which sort of, because it's often misunderstood as being Poland. I'm not sure
Mhm.
if this is what is being told, but it was more of a union between a kingdom of Poland and the Great Duchy of Lithuania. And since there was no such thing as nation states, national identity, it was more of a union of a kingdom and a duchy and all the peoples that lived in it. So it basically comprised of today's Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine,
Yeah.
and Belarus, you know?
Hmm.
And this also goes into the whole complex of Russia because the Duchy of Moscow was for the longest time under the, um, well, it was conquered by the Mongolian Empire, as you
Hmm.
probably know. And
Yeah.
so the cultural influence was there, the language was influenced, and because the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had a doctrine created by the nobility called the Golden Freedom, and along those laws was the law of respecting the other, the law of respecting all of the individual cultures within the Commonwealth. That basically meant that the region that is now Ukraine could, without problems, uh, the language could flourish much more than the language within the Mongolian Empire. So, what it meant in practice, that from the perspective of the newly formed Russian Empire, as we've discussed, Ukraine was actually more Russian than Russia itself,
Yep.
if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
It does.
that's
Yeah.
and that sort of created like a existential threat sort of feeling. And that created this weird, very special negative dynamic that Russia has had with Ukraine when compared to other countries that it had enslaved. You know, when
Yep.
the uh, partitions of the Commonwealth happened, Russia right away went to eliminating the Ukrainian language, elimination
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
of the Orthodox Church of that existed within the Commonwealth that was very separate from the Russian one. It had its separate head of the church that was very separate from the Russian one. All that was, eliminated. And there was this because, that's it couldn't be that there existed a truer inheritor to the Kiev Rus than the newly formed Russian Empire, right? It was,
Yeah, it was like kind of like an attempt to, from the start, basically to remove us as a separate entity,
yeah,
to kind of like absorb us. And yeah, so this is something they still very much hold on to today, which
yes,
it's kind of, kind of a bit cringe, talking about like centuries old like drama, if you will. But for them, it's very obviously important because they
yeah,
still pretty much identify themselves as like this the main Slavic like nation, the
yeah,
descendants of like Kiev and Rus. So for them, it's still pretty important, and that's why also amongst other reasons, obviously, it's hard for them to let go of Ukraine and let us, be separate from them.
yeah. And of course, there's the
Well,
whole, yeah.
yeah, sorry.
No, 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 no. It's okay. It's like I was saying that because it was a thing that kept going. It is the thing that explains the USSR's policy when it came to Ukraine. It also was the thing that led to the Great Hunger, which we both
Hmm.
probably agree was a genocide. We're not,
Obviously, yeah.
not gonna mince words here. And it continues to this day, you know?
Yep, sure does. Well, we sometimes talk about it like we have like, sounds a bit morbid, but we have like a couple decades when they don't try to subjugate and genocide us. It's like, relief moments, and then they try to again and again and again. So every like 50, 100 years, there's situation like that,
Okay, I
basically.
have your face on
Uh,
stream now.
yeah. Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Hey, guys, to anyone who's watching or listening, you managed it, right? Good
Yeah.
job.
So
Yeah.
there's also, because as I've told you, national identities were something that basically in the terrain of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth started forming after the partitions. The Polish um, identity, the Lithuanian identity, the Ukrainian identity, Belarusian, and all of them sort of started forming basically at the time when um, what was the Commonwealth was under the rule of Prussia, Austria, and Russia, of course, right?
Hmm.
And after World War One, all those newly formed nations, and this already defeats Russia's rhetoric about Ukraine not being a real country because in the Austrian partition, you know, the part of the Commonwealth that was part of became part of Austria, the Ukrainian Polish dispute over which lands of the Commonwealth should go to the which newly formed country was treated by Austria very cynically as a Polish internal problem. That is how they framed it officially.
Hmm.
And after the war, there was conflict between the newly formed Poland, newly formed Ukraine, and newly formed Lithuania as to which parts of the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth should belong to which newly formed country, right? And it reflected like that Lviv, that
Hmm.
the all of the outskirts of the city were Ukrainians, but the city itself was majority Polish, and there was a conflict
Yeah.
of where should this place go, right? And it caused the whole war, and it caused Lviv to be a part of Poland before World War II, and now it's part of
Yeah. Also, there is.
yeah,
Yeah. Also, there is like a bunch of other obviously factors that Russia completely like omits, which is
yeah,
in like after the dissolvement of Russian Empire, Ukraine was fully unprepared to be its separate country. It created UNR, it's called Ukrainska Народна Республіка, which is basically
yes,
Ukrainian National Republic, which they never even bring up. This was the country of Ukraine, you know.
yeah,
This is
Ukraińska
that was
Republika Ludowa, yeah,
yeah. That was basically ruled by Centralna Rada, which was,
yeah,
an analogy to our today's Verkhovna Rada, which is like the central, like how do you call it, like a political government apparatus. And
yeah,
yeah, so we pretty much were full on prepared. We established our borders, which are, by the way, bigger than they are now. Even they included, like, if I'm not mistaken, Belgorod, Kursk, like parts of Russia right now that were like
hmm,
previously part of like Kiev Rus and stuff like that, whatever, right? So basically what happened is that we wanted to, as we did before, our own independence, and we had internal problems. Obviously there was like problems within this government. There was like Skarpatsky, who Hetman, who pretty much like undermined it in many ways. There were like internal like civil
stripes,
conflicts
yeah,
there. Yeah, stripes, yeah, for sure. But this was kind of like accepted, I believe, as borders at the time. But afterwards, Red Terror period pretty much started. So basically, what happened is Soviet Russia very much, destroyed Centralna Rada and Ukraine, and
yes,
they
and
invaded
yeah,
Kiev and took it yeah, and that's how it ended. And they also divided it between Poland and themselves, which is, as you know, is Rishsky Dogovor, which is like, I don't know how to say it in English, but yeah, that's what happened, and that's how part of Ukraine ended up in Poland and part of it ended up in part of Soviet Union.
yeah, and then it went on to was basically swallowed by the USSR.
Yep.
And then, of
So that's
course,
what. Yeah,
the
sorry.
USSR invaded Poland along with the Nazis.
Yeah, with Hitler. Yeah, sure. Molotov-Ribbentrop.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's basically the story. Also, sometimes people completely like, to be quite honest, it's not even like history, just rewriting of history to feed their own narrative that they spread to pretty much undermine Ukraine and Ukrainian
yeah,
identity, and which some Western people as well unfortunately repeat, but that's like
yeah.
another
That
story.
is quite
Yeah.
painful to hear. Like big pundits saying that Russia invading Ukraine is just Russia getting territory back, which is just baffling to hear, to be honest.
Yep.
And well,
Completely disregard of us as people and our
yeah,
history. of our struggle for independence from pretty much everyone, to be quite honest, not just Russians, but various empires that took pieces from our country, and the struggle pretty much never ended. So
Yeah.
Ukrainian resistance continued pretty much all the time in attempts to live as an independent and country of Ukraine, and and just stomp all over that just to say, like, who cares, like, those Ukrainians, they whoever they are, they don't exist, those Ukrainians.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very,
not nice.
very strange. And now, of course, Russia is trying to, as we've discussed, do the whole rhetoric of Poland is like on the cusp of invading to get Lviv, to get the
Yeah.
terrains back. And that ship has sailed. Like, Lviv doesn't even, the population of Lviv, like, there was a point to be made, as I've told you, that there was the terrain of the Polish-Ukrainian Commonwealth, that there was this whole argument of where should the terrain go if the population is majority this here and majority this there. But there is nothing like this anymore. And Poland understands this, Like there is no one in their right mind. I mean, I know some that would, but no one in their right mind would propose the rewriting of borders, That's a thing that
Yes, they.
only Russia could conjure up in order to create strife between Poland and Ukraine when they are right now basically closer than ever.
Yeah, sure. It's completely like bullshit. Nobody takes this seriously whatsoever. I would must say that this whole Polish Poland will attack you is just about as stupid as probably the most out of touch thing I heard from Russia, and it says a lot because their propaganda is out of touch on a good day, and yeah, it's just complete nonsense, of course, and. Borders have been established, have been recognized in 1991 after
Yeah,
resolvement of Soviet Union, and has been understood and accepted by absolutely pretty much anyone in Russia at the time as well, obviously. So yeah, this is just total bullshit, and literally nobody in Lviv identifies as Polish. No offense to you guys, they pretty much full on Ukrainian. So yeah, so this is just the stupid talking point, and nobody in Ukraine takes it seriously. They tried, as you yourself mentioned, to do this kind of thing in 2014, actually, which was the time when I started hearing after Maidan revolution. I started hearing about from Russians that, oh, Ukraine will stop existing because we will just divide it again with Poland,
yeah.
with the Polish, yeah,
And Poland
as they
just
did before.
declined. And then
Well,
Putin said
yeah,
that he
still
was
not a state.
joking. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Poland and Ukraine is having this very interesting dynamic right now where refugees from Ukraine came into Poland, and I will say that the majority of the work done in accepting the refugees was more done by citizens themselves than the government.
Yeah, that's what I heard for sure.
Like the inviting into homes. Interestingly enough, my grandmother died in January this year,
Mm,
and she had
so
a
sorry.
it's all right. Like she had Alzheimer's, and she didn't really.
Mm.
She was out of sort of contact with the world. You could say she
I
was.
see, see.
She was 90 something, and she didn't
Oh,
really.
that's a long life.
Yeah, and she had a caretaker from Ukraine. You know,
Mm.
and now she basically lives in the apartment when grandmother lived, and she just pays the electricity, and then and that's basically it. And there's a
Oh, that's nice.
Ukrainian flag, from the balcony that proudly waves.
Yeah, thank you. We always appreciate that stuff for sure.
Yeah, there are a lot of Ukrainian flags in Warsaw and Poland in general right now. There's this sense of camaraderie, I think. And
Mm.
Ukrainian refugees were basically given the PESEL number, which allows a person to function in Poland, like
Yeah,
healthcare,
no.
and all those other things. And from what I know, President Zelensky basically said, I don't know if it came into law, that Polish citizens would basically have near citizens right in Ukraine, you know? So this
Oh,
sort
I didn't
of,
know that actually.
yeah, I think he did say something like that. I have heard. It
Mm.
was some time ago. And it sort of shows this sort of camaraderie between countries based on shared history and heritage. That does not have to mean that one country comes in, tramples, and tries to enslave the other country, you know? It can be
Yeah,
built
for
on
sure.
mutual respect, mutual, you know, recognition of one another rather than,
There's some story, right? Then between strife between like Poland and Ukraine, obviously, right? Like
yes, there
pretty
was very
nasty
complicated.
shit occurred, from both sides for sure. And
Yeah.
yeah, so many in Poland, oh, not sorry, not in Poland, but in Ukraine, in the West especially, right? So in the East, it's a little bit different because our like abuser and our subjugator was Russia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we in the East pretty much care only about that. But in the West, people, have some opinions, especially like nationalist types, like a hardcore, like, far right people as well.
Yeah.
They sometimes, see Polish as still like, but it's a very minority group because mostly, when countries kind of like evolve with time, they change and they behave like cordially and civilized with each other, then you can easily let go of like a hard history, right?
Yeah.
So if that's, yeah, so we can leave the past in the past only if it's in the past.
Yeah.
Because in Russia's case, it's not. So we would be holding like grudges against Russia about the past and talking about it so much about like genocide and oppression and all of that Russia perpetrated in cultural genocide and
Yeah.
all of that in Ukraine. We would be talking about it so much if first of all it was admitted as such by most of the world, and second of all it was admitted by Russia, acknowledged, and but they don't. Not only they deny all of that. They pretty much just doesn't even they don't even admit us as like nation. So they call being a Ukrainian as a disease of the mind and shit like that.
Yes.
So when yeah, obviously, not to mention like invasion and war, obviously that's the obvious one why we are still remembering the bad old times. But yeah, with Poland, it definitely like if anyone like cared about that, they pretty much don't at this point, because of the camaraderie and
Yeah.
how much Poland helped with the refugees and talked about like Ukraine and supported us in like European Union and things like that. And I think I saw the survey that actually showed that Poland was like number one country in Ukraine, like in terms of who they consider the brotherly nation right now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I had a whole argument with a person who will not be named about, because Ukraine has
Yeah.
basically banned a few books from the curriculum, to get rid of the
Yeah.
Russification. And a Polish author was, Adam Mickiewicz, was put into the curriculum as one of the new authors. And a person tried to argue with me that the removal of Russian authors is censorship and horrible. And
Oh,
I don't really have patience for this sort of thing. Like, I just told them to learn what Russification is, and sort of, like, I don't think this sort of thing should be even entertained. Like, it is
yeah.
perfectly reasonable for Ukraine to want to free itself from the Russification that has been subjected to for so many years.
For sure. Like this person is not a good faith whatsoever. So talking with them just makes zero sense in my opinion. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's just the thing is, of course you want to remove narratives that literally deny your existence.
yeah,
Yeah, obviously, right? So not only it's wrong like on historical terms, but for example, like we have like even when I was like a child in school, right? I'm not that old,
hmm,
so when I was like a child, there was a bunch of shit like that even in my like history books. So they would call like Mazepa, for example, Getman Mazepa, a traitor. And I remember reading it and I was like, who the hell he betrayed though? And then you realize that it's Russia. So it's Russian emperor and
Yeah.
he didn't betray Ukraine. He was actually doing everything to actually help out Ukrainian people and Ukraine. So yeah, so for us, he's definitely not a traitor whatsoever. He did what he had to actually, which was to, preserve Ukraine. But he was painted in my books, like, learning material
Yeah.
as a traitor, simply because we were forced to look at it from a Russian narrative and Russian perspective and be like subservient basically to Russia. So anything that does not serve Russian interest is awful betrayal and should be prosecuted and condemned.
Yeah.
So things like that, of course, should not be in Ukraine's history books, not only because they're simply absurd, but also it's just straight up colonial, like imperialist,
Yeah.
bullshit that happens not only with Russia, obviously, right, but with other countries. So this history is told from the point of the strong one and of the one that is doing the conquering and subjugation, obviously, right. So this has been our
Yeah.
narrative for some time, and it's very much the time to change that, obviously.
Yeah. That is, it's good to see this sort of effort to cleanse like the literature, etc. Because if you're gonna choose authors for your curriculum, it should be like your own choice, not something that has been thrust upon you from Russia, right? Like I would think
Obviously.
it's obvious, but don't some people don't think it is. And I don't know if you've heard this sort of conspiracy theory that has been for some time in Poland, that there was this meeting, I think, and there was a rumor that Poland and Ukraine would combine. The new capital would be, guess where? I'm gonna let you guess where the new capital would be.
Oh, the combination of Poland and Ukraine? You mean like Poland absorbs Ukraine, or
No, a
what?
combination, an actual, just a
Ah, okay.
combination.
So whatever the heck, Lviv or something. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not.
Lviv would be the new
Yeah, Lviv.
capital.
Yeah, I guessed right. I guessed right.
Yeah, Lviv. And the logic behind it is that if Poland and Ukraine would combine, then Ukraine would de facto join the European Union overnight with zero paperwork. That was
Uh-huh.
basically the logic behind the conspiracy theory.
Yeah, well, thank you, but no, thank you. Yeah, basically, I appreciate my polls, but not as so much to actually like join them.
No,
I
nobody,
don't think.
no, nobody entertained the theory.
Yeah, obviously.
You know, like there
But
is, there's
it's
actually,
just.
there's just no need for that. To be honest, you know,
Yep.
like we can appreciate the heritage that we have of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is, in my opinion, a shared heritage of Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. And I think there was after war, and that plan was, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, there was a plan after World War One which was actually shut down for there to be a confederate country that would be made up of Poland, Lithuania, and Belarus, and Ukraine would exist as a separate country, but as a close ally to Poland. And that plan was basically to create a counterforce to Russia.
Huh. Okay, that's sounds like a good plan right now, honestly. I mean, not the guys you join in the same, but all of us like joining to be like a
Yeah,
counterbalance. Yeah.
I think it would
Also,
be. Yeah,
yeah, sorry. I also heard like a bunch of people talking in Ukraine about it, like to obviously like there's NATO talk, there's like European Union talk, obviously, right? But
yeah,
there's also conversation about creating some type of like a new alliance, which is will include obviously Poland, Ukraine, Baltic countries, Lithuania, maybe
Yeah,
Estonia, obviously as well, stuff like that. So Czech Republic, and potentially like maybe like Slovakia. So basically, like all the bros,
yeah.
in this in this story.
Well,
Sounds good to me, honestly.
there's one sad bro in this whole story, you know? I think you know
Yeah,
what sad bro I'm referring to.
can potentially be Belarus, but
Belarus, yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah,
like there was this, and I'm a bit sad that it's not being talked about as much anymore. That basically the whole, um, like, all citizens of Belarus stood up to overthrow, their despotic
yeah,
leader
Lukashenko, yeah.
Lukashenko, and it's really sad because the only reason why Belarus is not free right now is because of Russia, you know? It's because of Russia
Yes,
keeping
but
it as.
to be quite honest, they're so beyond like subjugated and they don't even like speak. The language is borderline destroyed, and yeah, it's just they have been subjugated for a much longer time and did not had the ability to resist as such. And unfortunately, I must say that most Belarus people are incredibly conformist. Not to say they support this invasion, for example, most of them actually don't, but it's not like Russia in any way, shape, or form. But like a bunch of my friends lived in
Yeah.
Belarus for quite some time, and they're like very down, like very conformist, and with very, very, very
Well,
little like hope that there's any type of change
that was
eventually.
sort of the thing, that was sort of the status quo for the longest time until that fateful election, you recall, where it was
Yeah, yeah.
unobvious, where basically the whole country stood up in protest.
Yeah,
Like
which was
was,
a move, but not a move like Maidan Revolution,
yeah,
So so they didn't like do it, in my personal humble opinion, hardcore enough, So
yeah,
this is still a move step up for sure, like considering that nothing like that has happened for decades. But yeah, of course, like this country, the Belarus is way more like subjugated, of course, by Russia than Ukraine was, and yeah, there's
yeah,
something
but
with
there
that for sure.
basically there was talk of like, well, the only thing keeping Lukashenko in power is Putin. That is the only
Yeah, well,
thing.
pretty much. You can be like a little bit salty considering literally our Kiev, north of Kiev, Kievska Oblast was pretty much attacked from Belarus, and all of the like massacre in Bucha, Irpin and things like that was pretty much done because Belarus, was used like a Platzdarm, if you will,
Yeah,
like a stage to state that invasion, and very little autonomy that they have, allows Putin to do that, obviously. And but yeah, most of Ukrainians don't refer to Belarus people in a very negative way,
yeah,
considering the fact that we do in fact know that most of them don't support this whatsoever. Yeah.
yeah. And there are, of course, the organized um, so-called saboteurs within Belarus that saboteur the war
Hmm.
effort against Ukraine,
Yep. True.
derail the trains and so forth, which is a good sign.
Yep.
And of course, Ukraine is an ongoing big topic in Poland. You know,
Mm.
it's like when uh, tweeted about you tweet about a place being bombed and people dying, and then basically on the same day I see it, reported on the news in Poland.
Uman, you mean, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, and basically,
Yes.
like some of the Polish media really don't play around with words when describing the invasion. Like in Polish media, basically, like, and it's a bit, you could say, for some media would be shocking to portray it like that, when you hear the Polish media and you just hear, yeah, basically Ukraine is being attacked by rapists and murderers,
Oh,
which is
we use
true.
language like that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
The media does use a language like that when describing the
Brute
Russian
force.
invasion, Oh, yeah, like Ukraine is defending itself against rapists and murderers. Well, I mean,
Yeah, we do, but
which is true, but
people don't talk about that.
I'm shocked to hear this sort of language in media.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, even I'm surprised. Um, yeah, well, you wouldn't definitely would hear things like that in Germany or like France or something. So yeah, of course it's yeah, this pretty cool, I think, because maybe because Poland is certainly like close to us, like not only like border wise, but
Yeah,
culturally, and of course this connection has been made since refugee escaped to Poland and Polish assistance of Ukraine in many ways.
yeah,
So yeah, it kind of makes sense that people would be more open and more like direct and authentic and like coverage of what is going on.
yeah. And of course, there's there is the joint history of oppression by Russia and the
Yeah,
USSR, or the
sure.
Russification of trying to erase the language. So, Roland, pretty much, this is what I like. That's the funny thing that you've said, when uh, a Polish politician said, "Oh, we know how to fight with Russia because we've been fighting Russia since," and he gave a year. And my nitpick was, well, no, because Russia wasn't even Russia back then. So,
Yeah, but what he means is kind of
yeah,
understandable.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah, but history nerds are very particular. so,
yeah,
so you felt like not my man, like
true.
Russia was not a thing. Yeah.
Like it's just, but it's so bizarre and strange to hear the. I think it's just a thing that when you live, especially in Ukraine, and even when you live in Poland, it is so bizarre to hear rhetoric like, oh, Ukraine is just trying to push for World War III. That's a thing that I hear
Oh,
often.
yeah, yeah, that one.
That's like, that's the most ridiculous argument that I've ever heard in my entire life. Like when you defend yourself against invasion of a, it would be like telling Poland in 1939 when Germany attacked,
Yeah, yeah.
wait, why is Poland pushing for World War II? What is Poland doing? Maybe Poland should just try to negotiate
Oh,
with
yeah,
with
yeah.
Germany. Just try to negotiate. This is another thing that I keep hearing. Ukraine should just negotiate, and the most dangerous and bad rhetoric of all is the US should pressure Ukraine into negotiation
Yeah,
by
that one.
saying that it will cut off the funding or cut off the support. That's some of the worst things, especially since, in my personal opinion, Ukraine is not receiving enough support,
Thanks.
because there's a really good article that sort of described it, that Ukraine is receiving a drip, the thing that you get in a hospital to get nutrients,
Yeah, yeah.
but not receiving the needed transfusion, right? So, in other words, Ukraine should not be receiving gear, weapons, etc. when it's starting to run out of those things. Ukraine should be given enough to have a crushing advantage over the enemy. That is what should be happening because that will, ensure that the war will be won, you know?
Yeah, that's something that many soldiers, yeah, I talk with as a volunteer, obviously, right? They do
Yeah.
say that it feels like we have given weapons to defend, but not to actually liberate.
Yes.
So the defend already exist in like all our territories that we managed to secure already, but not to liberate the ones that the country itself, like all of Ukraine, right? So for the defensives, but not for the offensives. And this seems to be the I guess you could say the opinion of quite a lot of like army people I talked with. But at the
Yeah,
same time, I try to be, grateful for what we have been given, because I quite
yeah.
honestly was pessimistic about it and didn't expect even that.
Oh,
So
that's true.
yeah, yeah, pretty much I expected some type of like maybe like slap on the wrist, 2014 style, and maybe like some sanctions towards Russia, maybe, but I definitely didn't expect as much support as we got. So, you take the wins when you
Yeah.
when you have them,
From
but
yeah,
yeah.
definitely from where I stand, Ukraine should be getting like a lot more support. You know?
Oh, sure, yeah. But, I appreciate it for sure, but it is what it is,
Yeah.
Counteroffensives, I hope, will be successful, and we will manage to push forward even more and liberate cities and villages under occupation, which is something I truly worry about. As someone who took trips to occupied areas several times,
Mm.
the things that have been done there to Ukrainians is just
Well,
abysmal. Let's put it like that.
it's
Yeah.
genocide.
So I obviously want to liberate all people from this type of horror, and as soon as possible. And this is something that most Ukrainians obviously want,
Yeah.
because negotiations is impossible with people who came to destroy you
Yes.
as a country, as a nation. It's not something. It's not something that you can negotiate. What exactly are we negotiating? Our right to exist. I
Well,
apologize, but this is not not negotiable in my opinion.
I think there is one type of a negotiation that I think is on the table. The negotiation of um, a total unconditional surrender of Russia. I think that is the only
Yeah,
thing that
removal of the
is,
Mars territory.
yeah. Like, I don't think it is acceptable for Russia to keep any Ukrainian territory. It's like,
Yep.
I think it should be obvious, and yet so many people don't seem to grasp it. And I think it's just because people feel safe in their homes, very far away from the situation, and just treat it like almost like a game, to be quite honest.
Yeah,
Like,
for sure.
just
Yeah.
give away some territory. What's the problem? Just give away a few lands. There are a few problems with this sort of logic. First of all, if Russia would get any sort of territory, then I think even I think Dylan Burns said that as well. They would just invade again. Like, of
Yeah, that's my
course.
my point. Yeah.
Like, I think I've answered to you in one tweet that that was the way like Vietnam became a colony of France. France attacked Vietnam, and the royal family was not willing to fight France. The people wanted to fight, actually, and it would have been a very long, costly war for France, and not so obviously won by France, right? But instead, the Vietnam royal family did not want to support the people, and France basically conquered a piece of territory, just a piece of territory, and then bargained for peace, negotiated, you know, just negotiate. And the royal family did just negotiate, and there was peace. And what happened then? France attacked again and took
Yeah.
another piece of territory, and then another piece of territory until there was no more Vietnam. There was just a colony of France.
Yeah, of course, it gives them pretty much a stage to consider to then further their invasion. Anytime they want, they can secure their positions in the and get closer, 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 to Kiev and stuff like that. And of course, for them, it's only if you like are pushing for negotiations, especially those done by blackmail, as you mentioned, like not giving us weapons to push
Yes.
us to. Yeah, so it's just pretty much what you're doing is you're giving Russia opportunity to in the future further and further invade Ukraine.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that is pretty much be the downfall of us as people, and not to mention the fact that they have, it's not like the first time, obviously they have precedents of doing these things to other countries such as Moldova, Georgia, for example, right?
Yes.
And yeah, so this is also like in Ukraine 2014, obviously. So we did
Yes.
try to actually to negotiate, because Minsk Accords were exactly that. They will attempt to, okay, you took this, maybe you can chill, you took this Crimea, Donbass, maybe that's it, maybe that's enough. And as you can probably easily see right now, it wasn't. So yeah, we expected this to happen at some point, and it did. So yeah, not to mention the fact that it's very, very, it seems like immoral, to say the least, to leave those, like, it's not just territory. I
Yeah.
understand it's just landed territory for people who are not here, obviously, like you said, for them it's like a game of sorts.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's not land, it's not a piece of territory, it's someone's home, it's part of
Yeah.
our country, it's our people are there.
Yeah.
And considering what was discovered, pretty much in every city or village that has been deoccupied, leaving them to that is what we are going to be doing, to mass slaughter, to prosecution, to torture, rape, and deportation, imprisonment, and all of the above.
Yeah.
So yeah, I prefer less mass graves, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah. Less genocide.
Yep.
Like, it is just an unacceptable outcome. I think, like, it should be obvious for everyone, but it just doesn't seem to be for some reason.
Yep.
And yes, it was like you mentioned 2014. Yeah, it was, Russia did do it with Crimea. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and the bus obviously afterwards.
Yeah.
So yep. Um, Also, there is like this joke that Russia has not honored any, like, negotiation agreement document in their like entire career,
Yeah.
so to speak. Yeah, so I have like zero hopes for them honoring like any agreements whatsoever, because has never been like a precedent, pretty much, of them doing that. And yeah, so why would we, quite
Yeah.
honestly?
And speaking of which, because I keep going back to that thing that everybody forgets, like, uh, because some people unironically say that Ukraine is a fake country, etc., like this whole
Yep,
BS argument. But
I know.
people tend to forget that was a thing that was said about Poland after World War One as well.
Hmm.
Like, Poland was called a fake country after World War One, like the bastard creation of the whole Versailles Treaty, you know?
Yep.
So that's just absurd. That is absurd. And all we.
Well, it is pretty funny to hear this type of argumentation, mostly from people who are supposed to be like anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist,
Yeah,
so like communists and the socialist left, especially Western type.
yeah,
They just seem to become hardcore imperialist each time it doesn't concern the United States.
yeah.
If it's not like America or like the Western world who is doing the imperialism, then they seem to be very much unbothered by both the imperialist invasions, expansions, and of course the logic of some countries not being like real countries, nations not being real nations, so they can be conquered and observed by the bigger
Yeah.
ones.
So they
Very
can,
interesting position.
so they say they can be happy about the duopoly of power.
Mm.
It's like
Yeah, so
really
kind of like, yeah,
was really.
Russia, America type of,
Yeah,
contrast on, not to like remove the, the hegemonic
hegemony. Yeah,
power of, yeah, of United States, by basically sacrificing everyone else to
yeah.
Russia, which is
By treating
thank you, but no
other,
thank you.
yeah, by treating other
Yeah.
countries like pawns in a game, basically, unironically.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very much the time to show people that we're not a apologize for the language fucking pawn, and yeah, we're our own people, and with a very much strong will that to defend ourselves and to preserve things we care about, which is obviously our
Yeah,
freedom, our democracy, our like right to be Ukrainian. And yeah, it's just everything is going to be ruined if that was to happen, if they would succeed, and occupy us. And yeah, everything I care for would not exist anymore.
yeah.
So yeah.
It is also a great time to remind all of those socialists and communists that during the time of the Soviet Union, like Poland was basically a puppet state of the USSR as well. Even if it was not incorporated directly into the USSR, it was de facto like a puppet state.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, Many dedicated communists and socialists actually thought against the regime because they became disillusioned by the fakeness of the government, the imperialism of the USSR and
Yeah, yeah.
the basically, you know, like people don't know that, people don't remember that, that those people thought to build bridges among people like Polish and Ukrainian people, that they thought to sort of for actual freedom. There's this, I'm not sure how much in this case, like in Polish there's the word robotnik. Is it similar in Ukrainian?
Yeah, работник, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
So
noun mostly, but in Ukrainian it's противник, but I understand.
pracownik is more
Yeah.
like someone that works in a company in Poland. Pracownik,
Oh, I
just a
see.
general, someone that has a job. Pracownik.
Mhm.
And robotnik is someone that does like manual labor.
Ah, I see, I see. It's pretty much the same in, Ukraine.
Yeah. So someone perfectly explained how in the Polish People's Republic it worked. It was a People's Republic, like workers' republic, but the workers, robotnicy, were those who were glorious members of the party. And the actual manual laborers were the so-called robole. And those could be abused and treated like garbage, basically. You know?
Yeah, so like almost slaves, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And that was the reality of the whole pro Robotnik. Oh, there was a thing that I wanted to ask you because it might be my own imagination, but I thought I could have sworn that because many Ukrainian people I know in the East definitely use the word da for yes,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's a
But
Russian,
I I'm pretty certain I have heard people in Ukraine on either on TV or in parts use the word tak as well.
Yeah, tak is Ukrainian, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Uh,
So that's a word that we share. It's in Polish, yes, as well.
yeah.
Tak.
Tak is in Ukrainian, da is in Russian.
Nice.
So complete, yeah, different words. But mostly, sometimes people will say in East will say like they speak Russian sometimes, but sometimes it's just a surjek, which is the word for like a blend of Ukrainian and Russian. So
Yeah.
it's like a dialect, sort of like a mixture between the two. So in hardcore Russified territories, people mostly parts of the country, right? People mostly speak either Russian or they speak a surjek, so some form of like mix, so they have not been Russified like completely, but partially. They incorporate Russian words in Ukrainian, is what I mean. So yeah, tak is Ukrainian, da is Russian. Yeah.
Nice.
For
Nice.
example, for something like that again, like дякую is thank you, right, in Ukrainian,
Mm-hmm.
which is very similar to Polish one,
Yeah,
and
dziękuję.
yeah, pretty much the same. Yeah, but not the same, but quite similar.
Yeah.
Understandable, I guess you could say to both. But in Russian, it's спасибо, which
Yeah.
is again completely different word. And sometimes you would hear Ukrainians say спасибі, which is a Ukrainized version,
Yeah.
Slavic version of Russian word. Yeah, so this is just something that occurs when I guess there's like intense Russification, as you would get those like blends of languages and stuff
Oh
like that.
yeah, speaking of that, I was about to tell you that I wrote to you about that bank thing that the
Right?
older person in the bank that I overheard.
Oh yeah, yeah. Tell me the story. I
Yeah,
want to hear.
because at the start of the invasion, I know that was not very realistic, but I'm not sure if you're aware, but Polish people freaked out when the invasion started. I'm
Hmm.
not sure if you're aware that
Yeah, I
this
know. Yeah.
happened. Like, Polish people started withdrawing their money from the bank. I went to get some money and there was no money in the bank because everybody just withdrew everything. Polish people were freaking out that Poland is gonna be invaded, you know,
Mm.
which is probably not going to happen because of the whole NATO thing. But
Yeah.
there was,
But still, I understand the panic, you know?
yeah, Russia is a pretty scary country to say the least. I'm very glad, by the way, that it's not succeeding, that it's losing as much as it is. Like that's a really good thing. But to go
Me
back to
too.
the, well,
Yep, the
it's
story.
we're all in this together.
Yay, Polish bros.
Yeah,
I like to say Polish bros, as you probably noticed by now.
yeah.
Yeah, the story. The
So
story.
there was this older gentleman who talked with the lady from the bank, and he was saying, all of us in Poland, we used to learn Russian. It was mandatory, but people don't really learn Russian anymore. And the lady from the bank saying, "Oh, you know Russian. That must mean that you must have an easier time communicating with the Ukrainian refugees, right?" And he said, "Well, actually, I find it that Ukrainian is actually much closer to Polish than it is to Russian, in my opinion."
Hmm.
And the lady said, "Well, but it is still sort of not easy to understand sometimes." And then the older gentleman said, "You know, I have relatives in the very far eastern part of Poland. And to be honest, I sometimes find it difficult to understand them as well. So it's pretty relative,
Yeah, sure.
you know?
It is not. It is not opinion, by the way. It's just simply correct. Like I was, interrogated. Let's put it like that, by people who, for some reason, in the West, think that the fact that Russian and Ukrainian are similar languages, or are like the same, or Ukrainian is not a language. They say like a dialect, which is Russian propaganda point, which is they call it like spoiled Russian, something like that.
Oh, did you say Lithuanian?
Oh, yeah, Ruthenian.
Yeah, I thought you said.
Yeah, I did. I didn't say that. I
Okay.
said like basically like Western. What I was arguing at the beginning when I created my Twitter. Basically, is what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
with people who were making arguments that Ukrainian is not a language, which they were repeating like Russian propaganda points. That sees Ukrainian as a spoiled Russian, which is kind of funny because Ukrainian is way more similar to ancient like Slavic. Whatever.
Yeah, that is funny because Ukrainian is in a way much more purely Russian than Russian is, which is part of the whole.
Yeah. And the point that I was making basically is, well, first of all, who the fuck cares? If they're similar languages, it doesn't make us the same country. So Danish,
Yeah,
Swedish, Norwegian are very similar, like almost 90 to something percent
yeah,
identical. So then, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Nobody says they're not different like countries, and and all languages are recognized as separate languages
yeah.
as well,
And I
which
mean,
is
we can go to even better examples. Just because Austria and Germany speak German,
the same. Yeah.
the same language, it doesn't mean that one of those countries is another country, right?
Yeah, not to mention the fact that this argument basically says, "Oh, they speak the same language and you can fucking invade them." So
Yeah,
should then United States invade part of Canada that speaks English? It's just, yeah, it's just a ridiculous argumentation, and it just shows how they treat Ukraine and how they see it as not actually a country. People who make those arguments.
yeah.
But I did my investigation basically to actually find out the difference. I speak both Russian, Ukrainian, and of course I know they're different, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I actually did some research to learn what linguists actually say about it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
apparently, the difference between Russian and Ukrainian is the same as difference between Italian and French, or like, for example, Portugal and France and French, right?
Right.
So it's significant. So it's like 30, 90. I think 39% difference. Yeah, something like that. 39, I think, or
Yeah.
38. So it's a bigger difference than between the languages I just mentioned. So yeah, and there is less difference between Polish and Ukrainian linguistically than it is between Russian and Ukrainian. So the gentleman was in fact correct.
Yeah. I know we
Not only
share a lot of vocabulary. A lot of the time when I hear Ukrainian, I hear words and they just sound identical to Polish, you know?
pretty much very similar, yeah. Not all, some are
Not
different,
all,
yeah.
no. Some
I
are
can,
different.
yeah, I can understand Polish sort of if they speak slow, then I can get some
Yeah.
words. Yeah,
And
I was in
some,
Poland. It was pretty easy to understand, like at least like basic things for sure.
yeah, and some words are sort of the same but used in different contexts. That happens as well.
Yeah. That was funny when I was in Czech Republic for some time, and before the war, and I was like, laughing all the time because the words meant completely different.
Oh yeah, Polish people do
Kind
the
of
same
funny.
thing with the Czech thing. Yeah, that happens. Yeah,
Mm.
that's a thing that happens as well. This the humor
Yeah,
of
I was
the
living.
yeah
Yeah, I was living in this for some time on a street called Strashnitske, which in Ukraine means ugliest shit. It's like very, very bad, very bad looking, very unpleasant.
yeah
And I was like, what the hell? Like, this street is not that ugly, it's kind of okay. Why did they named it like that? And then I
yeah.
realized it meant entirely opposite. Yeah, so it was a good looking street, in fact. Same thing with cookies. So they would have like stands with bakery and things like that in Czechia, and that would be said like čerstvé pečivo, which is like I don't know how to say it, like dried up old cookie, basically. So čerstvé means that
Yeah,
is not
czerstwy chleb.
yeah,
Yeah, like
čerstvé chléb, exactly. Yeah, so
yeah.
it's something that already is not fresh. And I was like, oh, they're so like honest about it.
Damn,
They admit that their cookies are not fresh.
they
But then I
called it
realized it's the
czerstwy.
opposite.
Damn, czerstwy is also a word in Polish, and it means basically
Yeah.
the same as in Ukrainian.
Yeah, yeah. So like not fresh or like dried up.
Yeah, a
But
bit like
in Czech, it apparently it's based, so it's fresh.
oh my
Yeah, it
gosh,
was. Yeah, yeah. I was like confused
like the
all over the
opposite.
place. Yeah.
But yeah, that is. Oh, and do you know much about the recent visit of President? Oh, apparently the way Polish people say the because I know that English speakers usually say Zelensky. I know
Mhm.
that in Poland you say Zełenski, and I've heard that it is closer to the original
Well,
pronunciation,
actually, in Ukraine, you would say Zelensky.
right?
So would you say L there,
Okay,
Zelensky?
okay,
Yeah. That's basically how you say it in Ukrainian, but it's not that big of a deal
not big
how to
deal.
say it.
It's alright.
Yeah.
So he visited Poland very, very recently. I've even made a whole segment about it. Like, where were
I
you?
saw the footage of the visit, but I like didn't didn't really know what the heck was said. So I know it happened, but I don't know like the particulars of it.
Well, I know that there were a couple of important sort of actually things talked about because I don't know if you're familiar that Zelensky at some point said that there are no borders between us. I'm not sure if you're
Yeah,
familiar.
that I know you. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and there was more talk about the borders becoming more sort of open before between Poland
Hmm.
and Ukraine, which
Yeah, it makes
is
sense considering the fact that even before, like many people, as you know, like worked in Poland, right, and
yeah,
returned to Ukraine back and forth from the
yeah,
Western Ukraine, and so yeah, so it kind of makes sense. Also, since Maidan times, and we got laws like biometricni, like biometric passports, ID cards that
hmm,
allowed us to go to Europe without like a bunch of visas and things like that, which was very nice for Ukrainian people, obviously, because first of all, it's just allows you to work, to travel
yeah,
freely, but also you don't feel like a monkey in a zoo,
yeah,
behind the bars, basically, which is something we felt like before. And yeah, it would make complete sense to have like complete trust like that with Poland, I believe.
yeah. And I think this is one positive that, as you said, the past is being left in the past. I
Hmm.
think that sort of it is important to be um, open about what happened historically between countries, etc. You know, but I also
Yeah.
think it's important to be able to build positive relations and move forward. Something that certain countries seem to be incapable of doing. You know?
Well, like not pointing fingers, right?
Yeah,
Russia, you know,
yeah,
Russia being
Russia.
Russia. Yeah.
Like, of course, as I said before, Russia has a very specific relationship with Ukraine in particular, even compared
Yeah.
because Russia does conquer other countries, but its relationship with Ukraine is very particular, with the whole thing with the language that is
Yeah, for
called,
sure. Yeah.
like, even though, as I said, Ukrainian, as you know, is basically more Russian, like, is really interesting to think about, right? That in from Russian perspective, even though it calls itself superior, Ukraine is more Russian than Russia is, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah. Well, they kind of like we talked about it like in terms of like appropriation things like that before, right? But when you like Kievska, basically when the Russians use the word like "Ruski" is what it's called, like right?
Rus,
So
yes, from
yeah,
Rush.
yeah. So basically, what the country is called Россия, right?
Yeah,
In Russian as well. So we call them Россияне, which is I think makes sense because they are from Россия, you know.
yeah, it's the same.
Yeah. But they refer them to themselves mostly as Ruski because they use it as this sort of like umbrella term. So
Yes,
everyone is Ruski. So everyone like Belarusi, Ukrainians, they all are Ruski. And this is basically not only it's like umbrella term to pretty much undermine like Belarus Ukrainian identity, but also used as like a sort of like a how to even say it like the general word for Slavic people because it
yeah,
comes from like Kiev and Rus. So Ruski is like the Slavs. There's like this so to speak tradition in Russia in to call people Ruski и не русские. So basically Ruski is like Slavic people and не русские is like not Russians. So everyone else,
yeah,
this type of language creates obviously alienation because it's like us and them, us versus them.
yeah,
So but overall, yeah, this is just something that makes them again creates that connection with the Kievan Rus, but also creates this like feeling of them being like when like Westerners think of like Russian things or like Soviet Union, they think of Russians like Russian Ruski. They
yes,
think of all of us as Russian. So it created this like invisibility of other people who were like absorbed in this like Russian
yeah.
umbrella term. It's not actually like a nationality. Nationality is like Россияне, right? No,
Rusiania,
no,
yeah. It's like,
yeah, but they kind of created this umbrella term to pretty much like absorb all the rest, and it kind of was successful in a way because, like artists and poets and musicians and scientists, famous people, basically, like all have been absorbed and called Russians and Ruskiye. Despite the fact that they may have been Ukrainians,
yeah,
Armenians, Georgians, the rest of it. So,
yes,
so
I
yeah,
am,
this is like a
yeah.
parallelistic shift.
And this is part of the education that must happen. That it must be very specified. This person was Ukrainian, this person was, etc. And the Polish language is actually pretty interesting because you say Rosjanie, Rosjanie is Rossi, but in Poland, the sort of derogatory term Ruscy has developed, but it's developed for Russian people specifically, you know?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah, it's not
just,
something we use. So we basically, call them just Россияне, or we call them, which is, what they are. But some, if you want like to use like, a bit of an insulting vibe to it, then you say Москали.
yeah,
Yeah.
Moskale.
So
Moskale is like
yeah,
a historically used
Pogorsky,
term
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Moskale.
Hmm. And there's
Mm,
another rude one, which you probably know. Yeah, but this is like when you want to be especially mean, basically.
yeah.
Which is considered to be like a slur basically, but it's has to do with goats.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you probably I don't know if you want me to say it, but
No, it's
let's
okay.
leave it till
It's
this.
okay. It's okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Very nice.
yeah. Well, that's like what they say. They use хохлы all the time, which is like derogatory word against Ukrainians, or like salajedi, for example, which is basically like lard eaters. You know,
Mm-hmm.
because it refers to sala, which is like Ukrainian cuisine, which is like
But
pickled like lard, whatever the fuck, right?
speaking
Um,
that this is you've actually stumbled upon something very interesting because like I've even written to you about it. There's this
mhm.
dish pierogi ruskie,
Yeah, yeah.
because Rush,
I know pierogi. Yeah.
and it's just been rebranded in most shops from pierogi ruskie to pierogi ukraińskie, to not be sort of
Yeah.
mistaken with Russia in any possible way, even though it is, because I mean people do sort of mistake the word Rush with Russia, and the whole rebranding of the dish happened to not leave any room for a mistake. Those are Ukrainian pierogi, ukraińskie pierogi. You know?
It's very fun because when I was in Poland, I um, discovered this whole pierogi thing, and in our language, pirog means a different thing. It's a
Yeah.
different dish. Yeah, so it's a pie, basically, is what pirog is, right? So
Mhm.
it's a type of dumpling. It's a pie. So I was like, oh, they do love their pies, you know? It's pies everywhere. But then I realized it was basically our vareniki, which is what we call like
Вареники.
this type of thing. Yeah, vareniki, yeah. And
Вареники.
pirog is basically the same. No, not exactly the same, but very similar type of dumplings, mostly. Yeah.
And
And yeah, so I even ordered that, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna eat some pie, you know, and they which is dumplings basically. And I was like,
yeah,
oh, so that is pierogi.
yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
And of course, there's the dish that has always had Ukrainian, and it's named Barszcz Ukraiński. That is
Borscht,
like,
yeah, Borscht is the classics. I was actually super hyped. Call me like spiteful, but I was super hyped when UNESCO admitted borscht as like a Ukrainian heritage, part of Ukrainian cultural heritage, because it's our borscht. It's not Russian. Every time when people say
yeah.
it's a Russian dish in the West, I age like a couple years, you know?
I mean, it was always called Barszcz Ukraiński in Polish, so
Yeah, because you guys know what's up. But
yeah,
I'm
you
talking,
know,
I'm talking about like Americans and
Ukrainian.
Western people.
Yeah, that is the culture shock that I find myself in from time to time when I listen to people from the US speak on matters of Ukraine, you know? It's like when I, that's another big topic that we can sort of touch upon, the kidnapping of children,
Yeah.
and turning them forcefully into Russian citizens. Like when putting past a law that would basically hasten the process of switching the nationality of Ukrainian children to being Russian, you know? And I actually had people tell me, no, it's fine because it's basically Russia. So they're just taking Russian children from one place to another. And how do you even engage with that apart from just telling the person to fuck off, basically?
Yeah, but it's one of the worst things probably. Obviously, like rape, torture, and flattening of cities is not is not good in any way, shape, or form. But this is just I just cannot even describe how this makes people feel because it's just imagine like children are literally being stolen by people who pretty much annihilated their parents, killed their like families, their
Yeah,
neighbors from Mariupol, for example, right, and cities like that, and they are taken and then we to be basically re-educated
yes,
to believe like they're that
that they're
Russia
not.
saved them. Yeah, saved them from their own like peaceful lives and saved them by killing their parents and destroying their homes, you know.
Yeah,
So yeah, so it is very very hurtful, of course, to even think about it, and I do hope we will manage to somehow return people back.
yeah.
And it's
And
pretty
so
harmful.
it's a big topic because there was talk of children being kidnapped from orphanages as well.
Yeah.
And the thing is, because there are orphanages in Poland that have sort of, there are homes prepared for Ukrainian children that have accepted Ukrainian children together with their caretakers and any relatives existing in Ukraine, And in Poland, this is a good contrast to give, because in Poland, where there is a friendly, relatively, environment, the lady explained those children are traumatized double you know, because some of the children were in orphanages because, for example, they came from troubled families, you know, that already is trauma. And then they were uprooted from their lives, from their friends that they had in Ukraine, because they did have friends that they had to leave behind. Some of them had further relatives that they had to leave behind. And now they are even with caretakers in Poland. And the lady stressed that there is a very delicate process to this, that the children, depending on their age, must be made to feel safe. They must have a trusted adult with them to make them feel safe. And they have certain habits and things that they did in very specific times when in Ukraine, and that you must preserve the exact same schedule of the day for them to sort of feel safe and to, not, for the trauma to come down. And of course, the biggest thing is that they all miss their home, that they want to go home. And of course, they're in a situation that they are waiting and they will go back home. They are with their caretakers. But now, this is traumatic in a situation when all those things are being taken into account, that their habits are being preserved, that sometimes they get education via the internet, via the Ukrainian education system. And now imagine that trauma and put on top of it being taken away from your home forever, there is no coming back, and being put in a foreign family and said, this is your new home, you're now Russian.
The worst thing about it is the treatment, obviously, because I've read like several messages and basically Russian teachers and mothers that, kind of like accepted is the one word taken, the children. And they would be like, oh, they're so ungrateful, like Banderites, they
Yeah,
hate us and stuff like that. And you would be like, and there were like phrases like this even in those messages, like they need to be like, they actually need to be executed. Like there's no like there's no redeeming them, re-educating them in being Russians. And yeah, it's horrid shit for sure. Yeah, and this is one of the things that I most struggle with, because I cannot even imagine like some of like people I personally know were forced to, not children but older people have been forced to Russia basically through filtration camps. And yeah, it's just the worst fate imaginable in my opinion. I would probably lose like my mind entirely because of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the aspect, because there's the aspect of helping Ukraine with weapons, with support for the war effort. But I don't think we should forget about aspects such as supporting the children, And there are many sort of fundraisers happening to support the children of Ukraine. And I think that when the children are in those dangerous spots that are in danger, of the kidnapping, we should do something to, you know, remove them through that the danger, probably somewhere west in Ukraine.
Yeah, most people kind of like try to move their kids to, safety to the other parts of Ukraine or other countries, obviously, right? But
Yeah,
of course, it didn't happen in like cities and villages that have been occupied like
yeah,
almost immediately, right?
yeah,
So there's like a bunch of things there, obviously. But yeah, and people still continue to live in areas that are not as dangerous, obviously, that are not under danger of occupation, but still like a recent couple, Uman, we talked about it, 23 people, I believe, were killed, and four of them were children. So
yeah,
this was just happened in because they attacked with missiles the residential apartment building, and people just were there, and yeah, Uman has not been attacked much before that, and yeah, so pretty much things like that, of course, can still happen even if you're away from the direct front line and things like that.
Yeah. And there are
Yeah.
also volunteers, like when I go to my mom who lives more in the city, when I go to the store, there's sometimes a volunteer that is like gathering money for Ukrainian children, both in Poland and in Ukraine. You know, there
That's
are
cool.
volunteers that sort of. I think
Yeah, I
the
know a bunch of my people in Poland, live in Poland now. A lot of my friends. So they talk about like the what volunteers do, how things work there, and how our lives there. So yeah, I heard pretty pleasant things about how people in Ukrainian people in Poland have been treated comparatively to many other countries as well. So that's cool for sure.
yeah, it's a good thing, and I think that can go further. Those things can always go further, in my opinion. You know,
Hmm. Yeah, but
it's not
like I said, I prefer to be grateful for what we did get, than to be salty about things we didn't get. So
true. True. Well,
yeah,
I'll be salty in your stead. Don't worry.
thank
I
you.
have your
I
back.
appreciate the saltiness. Yeah,
You know, to push for more. After all, like, well, I think we've already talked about it, but it's quite shocking to hear. Let's just put it that
mm.
way. Like, big speakers like Hassan, like,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I really built huge respect for a person. You're friends with him, Dylan Burns,
Yeah,
you
he's
know?
here right now. Yay.
Yeah, he's here right now.
Uh,
Oh, he's
yeah,
with you in
yeah, in my
Kharkiv.
city. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I really built enormous respect for what he's doing, for his work in Ukraine. I think people like him do a lot more. Well, maybe that's my bias, but he does much more valuable and meaningful work than Hassan, whose rhetoric around the invasion was just horrible, you know?
Yeah, it still is, by the way. He didn't like change his mind much on anything or didn't apologize or retreat anything he said. Things like Crimean invasion was justified, he said, and didn't take it back. He pretty much said that this is all NATO's fault again. He said like this is America, NATO, whatever the heck, right? Also when Kerch bridge was attacked by our forces in Crimea, he basically spread this bullshit that this is a terrorist act, which
Yeah.
after like residential areas and whole cities have been wiped out. It's
Wait,
kind of like
do you mean the blowing up of the
in
bridge?
Ukraine. Yeah, yeah, we blew up the bridge,
He
and it's
calls that a terrorist attack?
yes, he did. He condemned it, by the way, and said it's a terrorist act. To actify a legitimate military target, they transferred, military machinery for it. They, tanks, all sorts of shit. So we attacked very much the legitimate target. And
Of
bridges have been
course.
legitimate targets since, I don't know, since the dawn of mankind,
Yeah, of course. Like,
So yeah, it's
it's
just stupid,
ridiculous. And of course, the final nail in the coffin, the denazification
Oh, yeah.
argument, which of course have been totally made bunk because there's the Wagner group, right?
Yeah, Wagner, yeah.
Yeah, the leader of Wagner group who basically defected and said that the whole denazification thing is a bunch of BS, which we already
Well,
knew.
we know, not a secret, yeah. But
But
yeah, we can talk about it maybe in detail, like why denazification shit
yeah,
is awful and harmful,
but
and yeah, but
like
yeah, I just need to go in like 10
okay.
minutes probably.
Oh, I can tell only one quick thing about the whole denazification thing. Even if Ukraine had like 100 of Nazi battalions, even if that was the case, that would be still an internal affair of Ukraine, not a carte blanche for Russia to invade. Like, people don't seem to
True.
understand that when a country has an internal problem, that is the country's internal problem. to solve. Not like this sort of argument does not work with any other situation. Like some people claim that Ukraine sort of forfeit its like sovereignty because of, and the list grows of the imagined things that meant that Ukraine was just carte blanche to invade. That is ridiculous, you know?
Yeah, of course, for sure. For example, like things like there was like this Pew Research survey that was done to pretty much understand how anti-Semitic some countries are in Europe, right? So
Yeah,
it was about like, will you accept like Jews as your neighbors? Basically, was the question. So not only just will you be like friends with them, or just will you accept like their literal existence in your country? Will you like tolerate it, right? And Ukraine scored the lowest. So we had like
yeah,
the least anti-Semitism in pretty much entirety of Europe, which was
yeah,
kind of fun. Yeah, what we scored, I think, 4%. Why, for example, Armenia, which is Russia's pal, 33. So you didn't see them go and denazify Armenia, right?
yeah,
And I'm joking, obviously. Even if there was like 50, it's not, uh, it's not, doesn't mean like it's okay to invade and genocide, obviously, right? But yeah, it's just very, very silly, and this in no shape, way, or form is a justification for invasion and expansion of their fucking empire, which is what it is. And yeah, of course. And this is why I pretty much am touchy about it, because this denazification idea, it's old one. So it exists pretty much
yeah,
since 50s, that Ukrainians were painted by Stalin pretty much as Nazis, Banderites, whatever the heck, because of
yeah.
history of UPA and Ukrainian Partisan Army and Bandera.
And of course,
And
World War Two. But
yeah, yeah, and he used it to pretty much justify things like Operation West, which was deportation of hundred thousands of Ukrainians from the west to Siberia.
oh, that's
So
like
yeah, it
a
is like
modus operandi for Russia to do the,
yeah.
the shifts in demographics. Like Poland knows that as well.
Yeah, replace as well. Yeah, so you remove the original native population, and you replace them with Russians there. So
Yeah,
then you can use them, as you like. That newly installed population. They did the same shit with Tatari, with Crimean Tatari, which
yeah, Tatar.
basically Stalin kind of like announced them to be Nazis and collaborators with like
Yeah,
Nazis, which was false, completely false. But he used that as an excuse to deport pretty much entire ethnicity to Siberia and Kazakhstan and other places, which quite a lot of them died on the road. And yeah, so
they do.
this is just it's a touchy subject, because this is just something that
Because
has
it's
been used to
ridiculous. Like,
yeah, yeah. It also has been used like historically to by Russians to pretty much justify doing anything with nations they want to subjugate and genocide. So
yeah.
yeah, this is
And
bad.
of course, when it comes to World War II, um, there was a sort of siding of Ukraine with the Germans, but it is a far more complicated topic than
Yeah, of
people give
course.
it
You have to talk about
credit.
it
And
carefully.
usually, people don't really, people are not usually, I've even used the word equipped to tackle this subject. It's a far more complicated
Mm.
situation than people give it credit. Actually, we had a pretty good teacher in high school, and he basically said, because he taught history with this very neutral, cold approach to it, and he basically said that since Ukrainians saw its chance to, I'm giving an abridged version as well right now, to free itself from Soviet Union, right? It sort of wanted to fight alongside Germany to free itself from the Soviet Union. And the history teacher basically said that the Nazi Germany, which turns out to be a good thing in the long term, the Nazis were pretty stupid because they sort of started killing potentially their strongest ally in the region that could allow them to
Yeah.
get a foothold and fight the USSR. And because while there was an attempt at joining forces, the Nazis saw all Slavic people as subhuman. So they, of course, treated Ukrainian as subhuman as well. So they just started killing them, you know?
Well, to be quite fair, it's not about not all Ukraine. Like it was only pretty much in western parts. So certain groups there, like UPA, ON UPA, like partisan army, Ukrainian nationalists, they did in fact try to ally themselves with Hitler and with Germans, because they only saw them as their only way to establish independent Ukraine, which you can clearly see in the documents that they wrote together, like letters and stuff like that. Is all we have those archives, right?
Yeah.
So they pretty much saw themselves, they saw like the Bolsheviki, Soviet, Red Plague, communists, whatever, right? As the biggest enemy, as the biggest threat, which they were, by the way. And yes, so they definitely like they did not have like any problems with Germans prior, so they have not been subjugated by Germans. They have been subjugated by Russians and Soviet
Yes,
Union.
very
So
complicated
yes,
history.
yeah. So they killed like almost all people who were part of like ONUPA. They were people who lost their like family members to Soviet prosecution. So it
Yeah.
was like a bunch of like things there, and for them it was like a ticket out of it. And unfortunately, of course, they didn't understand that.
The Nazis saw them as
They never
subhuman. That's the
They never will give Ukraine independence. So we can see it in the letters of such people as, for example, Shuhevich, who said, basically that it's wrong and we are like assisting them in like awful acts. And there's like no,
yeah,
absolutely no point in it, because they don't see us as, they will not give us independence. They don't give like a fuck about Ukraine and Ukrainian people. So yeah, so even and then eventually they realized that, and they started to fight on both fronts, basically. So with the Germans and with Soviet Union as well. So yeah, they became kind of like partisans on two fronts, because they understood that this was not their ally
yeah,
in any way, shape, or form. There's very interesting story about Shuhevich as well, that probably next time if we talk, I can
yeah,
explain his whole like anti-Jewish thing, but that changed actually in the process of this
yeah.
whole thing. And yeah, so was like a very, yeah, for sure, complicated history that
But that would require reading, and people don't like reading.
yeah, I know quite a bit about it, but people definitely not, and it's very easy to brand
Like,
people, as you know, as
yeah,
Nazis, and just don't give a care. Also, it's a very lame argument in general, because there are no actual like banderites in Ukraine right now.
yeah. And of course, like,
To-
the thing is
yeah.
that people just, when it comes to places like Poland, Ukraine, and all this general region, and even going back to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, people that the further west you go, the less people know. It's like
Yeah, for sure.
people don't really know anything about this region, which is why I'm doing the history bit, the history thing.
Yeah, because they just, they talk a bunch. It's a hot topic, Ukraine, right? So I understand why people talk about it, but sometimes you just want to, pull your hair.
Yeah,
Because it's just like it's complete nonsense that has nothing to do with the reality, and lack of like knowledge and understanding of Eastern Europe in general, but Ukraine specifically is just staggering. I would very much like to talk about that in detail with you next time, but I gotta go now, because I have to
okay.
do some
I
stuff.
hope we can talk
Okay.
again
Yeah,
soon.
definitely. Yeah, we can chat, because I would like to actually to talk about this whole Nazi shit, because as you
Yeah,
probably know, it's quite important to me, not to
yeah,
mention the
and
fact that I recently have been kind of swarmed by the person that should not be named.
yeah,
And yeah, so it was not pleasant in at all, but missiles are less pleasant, so I'm okay.
yeah.
I'm pretty chill about that at this point. But yeah, I would like to talk about like just how stupid this obsession with like
Hunting for Nazis in Ukraine,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, with magnifying
Not Nazi
glasses.
hunting, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And
I
not
think.
only it's stupid, but also I would like to talk about next time how actually damaging it is, and how much harm it can
Yeah,
do
and of
to
course, like
Ukraine.
for goodbye, I can tell you already. Like I've already told you this, but the famous professor, the Auschwitz-Birkenau survivor, the actual person that was a victim
Oh,
of the Nazis, said like the Red Army sort of uh, liberated my camp, and I will always be thankful for that. But does that mean that I should be indifferent and silent when Russia is just invading Ukraine right now and committing atrocities? Of course not. I cannot. I
mm,
cannot be indifferent to that. I cannot be silent when this happens, you know?
Yep.
So yeah,
Well, I probably will,
head out.
now. Nice talking to
Thank
you.
you very
We
much.
definitely talk again. I would
Thank you.
enjoy that. And, thank you to everyone like who watched, listened, and yeah,
Yeah.
see you guys at some point,
See
probably
you.
soon.
Bye
Yeah,
bye.
bye.